Hey everyone, Mac is back. Today I want to talk about the battle, not just battle mechanics, but also the how the system works. How do you become a better player? You know, through the math, through the the formulas that are created in this game to be able to fight. So when you are fighting, you know, if you're fighting someone bigger than you, how can you maximize your damage against that person to be able to do the most damage possible? So I'm going to make this a two-part video. So we're going to start with kind of the basics and kind of just an overview of what the formulas are in this game and just general definitions and kind of go from there. And then at the end I'm going to show you just some examples and punch some numbers in for you and kind of give you an idea of, okay, this is how, you know, if you're a new player, what kind of damage you might be doing with based on what your, you know, the tier troops you have, and you know, the buffs you might have, where if you're, you know, a bigger player, then how that kind of advances, and then it'll also help you, you know, kind of figure out where you want to put those buffs in the future. So let's get to it. So let's look at just kind of the basics and go over some of that information here. This might sound a little boring to most of you. I'm going to try to just kind of dub it down, and I'm not going to be able to make it too interesting, but I'm going to try to just be very, very basic, so I'm not throwing too much math over you, people that don't you know, aren't really math oriented, because I'm decent at it. I'm not the expert by any means, but I just want to relay this information and kind of give you some idea of how this is all affecting, you know, why we're going for, you know, the attack more than the health and the defense. So let's start off by just looking at, don't worry about this formula, I'll explain it later, but let's just look at, you know, well, actually the first thing I want to say is a lot of this information is from Love Angel's a guide in the forum. So if you go to the forum of the GT Arcade, you can find find all this stuff that I have in here. I just picked some of it to put it in here to kind of explain, because he did it, because Love Angel did it very, very well, and so I just want to kind of give credit where credit's due. So going through this, a 100% buff means you get twice the base value of whatever it may be. And the easy example of that is if you have 100 and you take 100% of 100, that's going to be another 100. So then you have two 100s, you add them together, you have 200, which is twice. And then you 200%, same thing's going to happen, you're going to get 3 times the amount. Very, very simple. So as you can see from here, 100% total attack buff means that your attacks will do twice as much of their base value. Research speed buff means that your research will happen twice as fast. Same thing with the motivation recovery, you'll twice motivation the same amount of time. So that's a linear formula. So basically, looking at this chart, you can see linear means this. It's a straight line. It's increasing exponentially based on obviously what kind of buff you have at that point. So the difference is, and what's the problem with saying that just everything's linear, is that they're not, and that's where the health and the defense changes. And as you can see down here from this function of 1 divided by x, that is how the research works, how the health works. And if you look down even further, here is an example of, you know, if you go from 0 to 100%, the buff reduces the time from 1 to a half, which is half the value, and reduced from 100% to 200%. So it would reduce 1/2, and then after that it goes to 1/3. If you get more, you know, you get 200%. If you get 300%, it'll be 1/6. So it's just gradually getting less effect. And as you can see here, this is that formula for it. And we go down further, you can see here is the effect taking place. So if you have 100%, you're doing quite well right in this area. If you have 200%, obviously it's down further, 300%, and so on and so forth. By the time you reach about, as you can see here, where it starts to flatten out, 400% right there, that's about where it starts to flatten out. There's a little curve here at 300, but 400% is about where it flattens out. Now you can still get, if once you increase another, couple 100%, you're still going to do well at 700 or 800, 900. But once you get way out here, it's not much of a difference. So I'll go over that later and how that actually is put together. So we're going to go over some terms and go down a little further, and some things maybe you aren't aware of. We'll start with mortality rate. So mortality rate is can only be modified by one of the Red Dragon skills, which is actually available right now. It just started. Once you unlock the shop for it, and you can modify this. That's how you modify the wounded and the dead. So by default, 40% of the damaged troops from attackers die, and the rest are hospitalized and 100% of the damaged troops from defenders can be hospitalized as long as there's hospital capacity. So at least 40%, and you can modify that a little bit. That's just something to think about when you're attacking, because when you're attacking, it's 40%. Now, if you're defending a grand castle, that's a little bit different, because defense, when you're typically defending, you are all the hospital are being filled up first before they start dying. In this instance, it doesn't happen that way. This is the basic formula for that, and this is really, really good. Very, very simple. So the damage that you do for your army will do. You take that attack number, whatever that number may be. You're going to add in your total attack and your troop attack. And when you add in those, you're going to times that. You multiply that times the counter bonus, and you may not have a counter bonus. The counter bonus is, for instance, when infantry attack spear, you're going to get a counter bonus. The base counter bonus is 200%, so it's going to do 3 times the damage. So you're going to take that attack, you're going to multiply it times that bonus, and that's why the counter is so important, because of the amount of damage that they're doing. Because this is a multiplier. You're not adding it on there; you're multiplying it times that damage, which is pretty good. Then you're going to subtract whatever the enemy's defensive stats are, and then you're going to divide that by the enemy's health, and that's going to determine your overall damage rate. Then we get down further, and this is where it gets a little more complicated, a little more interesting, and this is where I'm going to basically punch in numbers here for an example and show you how this works. So we're talking about the counter. And the counter was the example I used before was the infantry spear. So this buff can only be modified by that ancient dragon skill that will increase the effect. Normally troops will deal 2.3 to 3 times or more damage. I think this is what we kind of thought before, but knowing now what it is, that it actually is 200%, which is 3 times, and I'll show you that. So if you go into a battle report and you look at under the bonuses tab, you come down here to this section right in here where it has the counters, the infantry cav, the infantry spear, and the spear cav. Now if you just hover your mouse over the top here, you can see that the counter is 200%. So it's a 200% counter for each one, both sides, total. So that just basically means that tells us with these new reports that came out that a little while ago, is that the 200% is what the counter bonus is. We weren't sure before, we kind of had it calculated ourselves, but now we know exactly how much that is. So now what we've done is we've put the formulas together. So here is the counter bonus, and inserting that in here, what you're going to need is the base counter bonus, which was that 200%. You're going to multiply that times the total counter buff. So if you're able to buff the total counter, which you have to have that red dragon skill for that, then you can actually change that. Now if you don't have that, which most people don't, I would suspect, especially for newer players, is it's difficult to get without putting a lot of money into the game or being in the game for quite some time. So if you don't have that skill, this counter bonus is going to be times 1, because you're going to have 0 for this buff divided by 100, which is 0, add that to 1, and it's going to be times the 200, 1 times 200%. So you're basically just going to stick 200% in here unless you have the counter bonus. You can modify the counter buff, I'm sorry. And then you can see the different formulas are put in here. Each one that is highlighted, as you can see from the blue and the orange, are calculated separately. So the attack is this formula for attack is separate, defense and health, and then the counter bonus. So once you get the attack, you know how much the attack is, you multiply that times a counter bonus if there is one. This is not always 200%, because if you're infantry into infantry, there's no counter bonus, and then if you're the opposite of that, if there's a reduction in the counter. If you know, if you were attacking infantry into cav, then this counter bonus is going to be different, because you're not going to be it's not going to be 100%. You're going to lose half of that attack, which is so this is just something that you're going to keep in mind as well. Just basically know that if you do counter somebody, you're going to do well, and if you get countered, you're going to do badly. Very, very simple. Defense, you're going to take that attack, you're going to subtract the defense from it, and then divide all of that by the health. So the further, here's even a simpler way to look at it: your attack times the counter minus the enemy defense, and then divided by the enemy health. Very, very simple. There's a reroute skill which will actually affect this as well. So there's other type of effects you have in there. I think a lot of people have gotten this reroute. It was in one of the events a few months ago, and was just almost like a must-have if you could afford to do it. And what it's basically doing is it reroutes from the battle reroutes troops from the battle before it happens. So the rerouted troops won't participate in the battle, and the reroute can affect both defense and attack, and is basically an enemy march size reduction in another sense, which is a great way to think about that. You're reducing the amount of enemies that can attack you, so it's really, really good. Countering does matter a lot, but buffs and troop ratio matter more. So the countering is definitely nice if you can do that, but if you don't have the buffs or the troop ratio to match, then you're not going to be you're not going to do very well in battle. If you look at the troops attributes that posted earlier, you can see that the higher tier troops are nearly equal in stats. So the higher tier troops are very, very close, and let's actually go take a look at that. So looking here, you can see that here's the tier 4 group and the tier 3 group. I'm just going to go over the tier 4 about how the attributes are actually, the stats are actually very similar. We're gonna not even talk about speed. We're just gonna talk about the attack, defense, and health. So as you can see, for the infantry, they have the highest, they have the lowest attack. So their attack is 93 compared to 105, 115, 125. Now that means that they're definitely weaker when they attack compared to the cav and spear, just from their base stats. Now that makes it more difficult to get a higher higher number based on the percentage. So if you increase this by 500, increase these three by 500%, now we're talking that the spear have a much bigger advantage over the other two. Now for infantry, the health is their main advantage. So that's their their buff. They're at 97 per troop, where here's 86 and 85. They're almost identical. So when you want to increase that health, you get a lot more. You can take more damage with those infantry out front. So that's highly recommended. So this is what I did. I took the 97 and I did a times 5 buff, which is 500%. So if you just had 500%, adding in your total health and the health of infantry health, and they added up to 500%, you would get a difference of, we're doing cav as well, and so the infantry would be 485 compared to 430. That's per troop. So per single tier 4 troop, you're getting 485. So that is 55 more. So now we're talking 11 point difference. Now we're talking 55. So as you become a mid-tier player, this 5 actually will turn into 10, because you'll probably have 500% health and maybe 500% total health, infantry health and total health. And then this number becomes 970, or down here we're talking 10 here, and we're going to talk 860. So just looking at that, now we're talking 110 difference. So as this goes up, the difference is just is so much more that's why buffing the infantry is better, in my opinion, for the most part, and that's why a lot of people in the game have infantry as their front line. So that'll wrap up part 1. I will be back with part 2, and I'll start to fill in some of the numbers and some of the gaps, and kind of give you a little better idea of which how the damage is done, how to defend yourself, and which stats to buff, and so on and so forth. So until next time, Mac out.